Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bedpost Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Erin Pym. Here at the podcast, I intend to invite guests and performers from my Bedpost stage show that I do here in Toronto. But today, I have a special guest from the realm of sex, sensuality, and sensuality. Please welcome to the mic, Emanuela Fernandes. Hello.
Hello, Erin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. My gosh. I first came across you because you were kind of collaborating or presenting through Oasis,
Yes.
which is some place that I kind of know intimately a little bit.
You got to get intimate when you're at Oasis Aqua Lounge. Right?
You have to in some way. Yeah. In whatever way that word, means for you. Totally. And you are... Emanuela is a book author, a sensuality expert, and a culinary journalist.
Yes.
Am I saying all those things correctly?
I realize that it's a mouthful because, I've done so many things.
Yes.
And I do so many things every single day. And that's why I get such pleasure and satisfaction from my everyday life.
Yes.
So, but yes, you did actually mastered it just beautifully. Thank you for that. Because most other people will say, oh, so which one is the shortest one?
And you're like, no, it's all three or nothing, baby.
That's right. I love
all
that.
or
Thank
nothing.
you.
And it's kind of interesting that you, because the first thing I saw that you're doing at Oasis had to do with food and foreplay. So you have a bit of a culinary background, right?
I do.
Since you're a journalist and you've done a bit of writing in that field and whatnot. And how did you make the jump from kind of food into sensuality, sexuality type stuff?
Well, it's a great question because it kind of happened through really something like identity crisis because, I did news and then I did kind of very formal journalism. And then I realized that was just something that really wasn't as satisfying as I needed it to be.
Yes.
And I realized that I actually love to cook and I just had this passion for food and for writing about food. I mean, that's where the juiciness was. And that's what
juiciness.
also, yes, allowed me to be juicy, right? To connect with my juiciness. And the more I kind of explore the world of food and pleasure that people derive from food, and the fact that we're actually disconnected from, pleasure that comes from eating, from cooking, and so on, I realized that there was actually a niche there. And what I started to do is I kind of started to research about how pleasure and sensuality and food are interconnected, and I realized that actually food and sex are the only two forms of art that involve all five of our senses, which is a pretty cool thing, right? So nothing else competes for that coveted spot when it comes to giving us that ultimate pleasure. So I realized that there is a connection through aphrodisiac foods, which are the foods that stimulate our sexual desire.
Yes.
So I realized that there is really something that, to be said about, the connection, the strong connection between the two.
Yeah.
And then I just pretty much started to research, the kind of the sensuality of food. And then it kind of branched out to everything else, but it really started with food.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think we kind of follow a similar kind of pathway. I was in the food industry. I still am, but I was a restaurateur for a while. And then when I was kind of starting to want to sell my restaurant, that's when I got involved in writing erotica, and that's kind of what set me on my track. And it's interesting when I mentioned that to you, where you're like, oh, were they related to you in any way, the food and the sexuality, sensuality? And I was like, nope. Right. No, they weren't. And I find that very interesting, that for you, it was very much connected.
Very much so.
For me, I was like, nope, never even thought of it.
Well, maybe today we'll all think about it, because today we're certainly going to touch on some of those subjects.
Yeah. So why don't we start with food and foreplay then? So you mentioned aphrodisiacs. Tell us about food aphrodisiacs.
Well, the aphrodisiacs are the foods that are stimulating our libido. And I mean, the world of, culinary journalists and medical community, they're so conflicted when it comes to...
Yeah, is there science on it?
Absolutely. I mean, some people will say, well, there is really no correlation, but I do believe that, every single food has some sort of function, and it has some sort of purpose, and it does something either good or bad for our body. So, and all the aphrodisiac foods, they do something good and they have some sort of function. So most of them have the function to, that may either, fastens our blood flow, which also, fastens our blood flow into certain areas responsible for our sexual health, right?
I think I know the areas you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we're on the same page already. So this is going fantastic. And I mean, those are the things that kind of constitute aphrodisiacs.
Interesting. So what foods? What foods?
Let's talk about it. I mean, I'm going to kind of give you a couple of my favorites. So why don't we start with honey? I mean, there's something so sensual about honey, right? It has that, the sweetness and the stickiness and the, just kind of you can melt it and drizzle it. I mean, that sensuality right there.
You know what reminds me, sort of cut you off. I just had a tangent. I watched, have you ever seen splooshing? Food splooshing?
Yes, of course.
As a kink? Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things they brought up about honey specifically, say they drizzle a little bit of honey on the forearm or whatnot, and they just did this to the host to come and kind of demonstrate. And at first, it was more liquidy, and then as the water kind of evaporated from it over time, and over time of the friction, it became tackier and stickier, and the experience changed. Sensual. We're talking about your senses, the sensual nature of that specific item changed from when you just spooned it out of the jar and then kept playing with it, and then it became like, it went from kind of a slimy, slippery kind of a feeling to like a tacky, like kind of tearing at the hair, kind of like a Band-Aid, ripping off, or like when you get a wax, like it went from that. So it like had this range of sensation. That was the word I was thinking of, sensation. From when it was warmer to when it cooled and to when the evaporation happened. It was like honey, just in general. It was like, oh my God, this is like 5 different sex toys. As it goes along, in 5 minutes, essentially. Very interesting.
Right, and it's so sensual. You can heat it, you can kind of use it at a room temperature. It's fantastic, but it also contains boron, which is the ingredient that actually balances our sexual hormones. So
say
estrogen
again,
and testosterone.
Can you spell that for me?
Boron, B-O-R-O-N.
Boron. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, they say birds and the bees. Some people say that maybe that kind of originated from the honey, because it is one of the world's oldest aphrodisiacs. It's really, really fantastic. So I mean, and that really goes hand in hand with our sexual health, because I mean, if our
because isn't honey a superfood?
It certainly is.
You're encouraged to eat honey.
It's very good for you. I mean, it protects your throat from different infections and just common colds and things like that.
It's a natural sugar, one of our nice natural sugars that are good to ingest.
It's so good for us, and it is an aphrodisiac. So it kind of balances our sexual hormones, which is so important. Another one, I love figs. Do you like figs, Erin?
I do.
Oh, I love figs. And I mean, it's such a sexy looking fruit, right? It's an international symbol of fertility.
Is it?
And yes, it is.
For a reason, I'm sure. Yeah.
And of course
which you will tell me right now.
Yes. So what figs do, they actually are loaded with potassium. Potassium is very important for our muscles. So it actually builds our stamina. So we're able to, just really, really stay strong. However, on a flip side, it also helps to relax our muscles. So if you're coming home and you're feeling a little bit tense and tight in your shoulders, have a couple of figs and they're going to just give you that natural relaxing effect.
Now, when I think potassium, I think bananas.
Another fantastic aphrodisiac.
Is it? Yes.
It is. I mean, it's not probably as kind of worldwide known as an aphrodisiac or a very popular aphrodisiac, but absolutely. Bananas are also known to kind of help you with sleeping problems and things like that. So it also has those relaxing effects.
And I'm sure moving on from aphrodisiacs, we'll talk about how we can use food in other ways. It's very phallic, the banana.
Yes, it certainly is a very, very kind of pleasant for your sight if you're looking at it.
Very pleasant, Emanuela.
And I gotta tell you about my absolutely all-time favorite aphrodisiac. This one might blow your mind a little bit.
Yeah, give it to me.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Chili pepper. Do you like spicy food, Erin?
Ooh, I like not crazy hot. I like something with a bit of a bite for sure.
Well, let me
Chili
tell
pepper.
you what chili pepper does to you. It actually mimics the way we feel when we're sexually aroused. Think about it. When you're eating something spicy,
Yes.
right? The first thing that happens, your breath starts to race on you, right? And then your kind of sweat glands start to produce sweat, little sweat beads all over your
Yeah,
skin.
you're flushed.
You're flushed, right? And then as I said, your breath fastens and also your lips get a little bit tingly. And that's how we usually feel when we're sexually aroused. So it actually
Interesting.
mimics the way our body feels when we're aroused. That's pretty cool, no?
That is very interesting.
There you go. You live
Wow.
and you learn. You
who
see?
who would have thought that chili was just eat a big bowl of chili and then you'll be ready for sex. That's the takeaway.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
really
amazing.
neat, right?
Yes, very cool. And are these, so when would we eat these foods? You know, if we want to get the aphrodisiac effects from these foods. So when are we eating them, kind of, if we're looking to get those effects from
Yeah.
them?
So
Or like
listen,
what's the setup? What's the situation with
the
these
more
foods?
the better, the longer the better, right? So when let's say if we're eating them for a week, that's when we're usually kind of, when we incorporate them into our diet for at least a week, that's when we're usually getting the most kind of effective effect from them, right? Because I mean, listen, our body needs quite a bit of the ingredient to really kind of get us into the, to kind of, start to adjust to the food and start to kind of give us those wonderful effects.
So just eating one fig, an hour before, not necessarily.
Probably not going to do the same, but you really kind of have to make it into a staple and a part of your diet.
Okay.
On another hand, chili pepper, something like a chili pepper, right? It's going to work really fast. You're kind of going to get those very similar feelings and very similar emotions. So yeah, but I mean, if you were talking about traditional aphrodisiacs, yes, you have to kind of incorporate them into your everyday life in order
to get the
make
full
them.
effects.
Yes.
Yeah. So